Good evening and welcome to the Thursday, January 10, 2019 special meeting of the school committee and public hearing. I would ask all those in attendance to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we're going to begin this evening's meeting before we get to the public hearing with the recognitions for Emma McNamara. If you want to come up, and Dr. Kavanaugh, I'll let you do the introduction.
Over here. Hello.
Wow.
Yes, please. Thank you so much for coming in. This is always exciting for us to have somebody as accomplished as you come in to see us and to see some of what's going on in the district. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Emma, and welcome. So, Emma McNamara has had an article published in Tech Directions magazine. We learned about this from your teacher, Mr. Scott, and as I was reading this, I was amazed at what a fantastic writer you are, which brought us to the question of journalist or scientist, right? So I guess I would just ask you to tell us a little bit about how all of this came about for you.
So, nonfiction is kind of outside of my comfort zone. I'm normally a creative writer. I got an email from Mr. Scott asking if I wanted an opportunity to be published in a national magazine, and there was no other context, so I was just very confused. But then he gave me more information, and I found out I had to interview people as a part of it and interview firefighters and students, and that's also out of my comfort zone because normally for creative writing I just write alone in my room, but I decided to try it and I'm really glad I did.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the projects that happen in Mr. Scott's classroom.
So the projects are, it's been every year for I think 3 years or 4 years now. The students work with the first responders who give them problems that they have, and the students also come up with some more possible problems, and they have to create something that will be a possible solution, and they go through many fabrications and different models, and then they have the firemen come in again and show them, and they sort of rank the projects.
So I think one of the things that I found interesting is, as I was reading, and I kept thinking, oh my gosh, this process of sort of revision is something that's transferable, not just from an engineering classroom, but it's the kind of thing that I think we do in sort of science, and we do it in English. And then as I kept reading, that's exactly what Mr. Scott tells us in his quote, doesn't he? I also very much liked that he kind of takes sort of project-based learning to the next level and talks about problem-based learning. Are you actually enrolled in his class, or did he just find you as a writer?
I was in this class sophomore year, but not this year. I'm just a writer now.
That is great. Well, this is an amazing article, and I don't know if any of the committee members want to add to make a comment.
I have a question for you, Emma. It was fantastic writing. You talked a little bit about your comfort zone and being outside your comfort zone. How did you overcome that? You know, you talked about both in the writing style as well as interviewing people.
Yeah, for me, the interviewing part was especially difficult because I have social anxiety, so interviewing especially these important people was kind of difficult. But my dad's a journalist, so he's taught me a lot about it, and it's just I knew that I would regret it if I didn't go for it.
Well, that's a fantastic point. Just today I was at the Homework Center in Framingham, and the lady who runs it was talking about comfort zone. She herself is a very shy person, but she has to interact with people all the time. And she said, we don't have those choices to be in our comfort zone. Only when we step out of that is when we truly grow. So I'm glad you did that and you experienced this, and congratulations.
Thank you.
This is a huge, huge achievement, and I hope you continue to step outside your comfort zone in the future too.
Thank you.
That was the thing you said most often. That was, I was kind of laughing over here, and you're like, well, that was outside of my comfort zone, and then that was also okay. I'm like, this is a tough one. They threw this at you, and you rallied, and you did an amazing job. So congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm sure your journalist father is very proud of you for what you accomplished. So congratulations. Good job.
Thanks.
Very well done. I echo what everybody has said. And just, this is such a big accomplishment, particularly for somebody still in high school. I think to be in a publication like this is an exciting thing for an adult, but to have that before you've even gone off to college, congratulations and a fantastic job. It really, I never would have guessed it was out of your comfort zone.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I honestly thought that this was the kind of writing you always did. I would never have known that this was sort of your first foray into journalism because it's beautiful.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
And all the best for the future.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for coming in on such short notice, too.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's wonderful. Thank you.
So at this point, I would like to have a motion to enter into our public hearing.
So moved.
In a second.
Second.
So motion by Jen, second by Mina. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And so we will now open the public hearing, and I think we'd like to start that out with Dr. Kavanaugh, but we will invite, after Dr. Kavanaugh speaks for a couple minutes, anybody who would like to come up and ask questions or make comments to come up and please sit and just state your name for the record, but we would love to hear from all of you. So.
Yes, so I won't go through the entire budget presentation that we did last week, but I did want to point out something on this slide right here. So you can see what we added in FY19 and what we took away in FY19, what we added in FY20 and what we took away in FY20. You'll recall that when Mr. Bishop made his budget presentation, he had advocated to get another guidance counselor at the high school level. Since that time, he's been doing sort of a little bit of rethinking, and his feeling is that at least for the next year, he's going to be able to make things work without adding a guidance counselor at the high school level. So you don't see that there added, and you don't see anything taken away because it was never added and sort of never taken away. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Do we have copies of the slide presentation for if anybody needs those?
Hard copies?
Hard copies, no?
I don't have hard copies with me.
Okay. If anybody either at home or here wants to follow along, if you have a device, the slide presentation from last week is available on our district website. If you go to the school committee tab, you can click on budget and the budget presentation will pop up. So I would like to invite, if there's anybody that would like to come up and ask questions or make any comments, to please come up and you can sit right up here. So.
Pravina Tenety, 36 Huckleberry Road. I'm a member of ALPAC, Advanced Learners Parent Advisory Council, and my question is behalf of my kid and other kids who are not currently challenged in the classroom. I'm glad to see that there are positions for K-5 and a math and literacy coach for differentiation. My question is, how much of their job is for differentiation? And what do you see as the biggest challenges right now for differentiation?
I'll let you answer this too. I think one of the things that we need to think very hard about is when we create either new programs or new curricula, one of the things that is critical to making it work and making it work across all classrooms at a grade level is to ensure that teachers have an understanding of what the curriculum looks like. They get whatever training is necessary. We are able to put materials into place. And so I would say that those would be, in fact, the challenges. Later this evening, I will be presenting an entry findings report. And in the entry findings report, you'll sort of see that, you know, as I have gone through the district and asked people during a listening tour or in sort of gathering see and hear data, what it is that they think is important, there are people who are looking for differentiation, advanced learning, experiential learning, project-based learning, problem-based learning, a STEAM program. connections with community colleges, internships, and I only mention that to sort of show the enormity of the kinds of programs that people would like in the district. So as we move forward and we start to think about what a new 3-year strategy is going to look like, I think we need to think about, as a district, what are the important, sort of those big rocks, the important things to drive the instruction over the next 3 years. And I don't know if you want to add to that as our assistant.
Sure.
I know you requested a position too, so.
Yes, and I think the term differentiation is one that I hear in nearly every meeting that I attend that's based in curriculum. So when we work with teachers, I think to Carol's point, when we're looking at new curriculum, we're focused on teachers really understanding what the standards are, what it is that they need to roll out, and what students need to know and be able to do by the end of a particular unit. But as teachers become more embedded in the curriculum and more familiar with that, we're working, I would say, very carefully. So I'll give you social studies as an example. The curriculum is changing, and in all the curriculum documents that we're producing, differentiation is a category in the curriculum document. So as teachers are creating and becoming more adept at what the expectations are, they're also digging in to figure out what are we going to do for our advanced learners, what are we going to do for our struggling learners, and that's true in all content areas. So, you know, I can't tell you that I think we're there and every lesson is differentiated in the way that we would like at this point in time. In every area, from literacy through the content areas, that is a focus of our work, and teachers are keenly aware of that. In some cases, it's simply the challenge of locating resources, understanding the needs of your students, and making sure the resources match the needs and the challenges in the classroom.
And I think that, you know, the project-based learning, problem-based learning, all of those work really well with differentiation too, right? They do work well together.
Yes.
So thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to come up to speak? Okay. So the next steps then in the budget is we will bring this back again next week. We are certainly still, if people want to reach us for feedback by email, we certainly welcome that. And we will take this up again next week so that we can vote a budget and submit it to the town manager's office following that, so it can go through the town process before it gets to annual town meeting in May for a town-wide vote. So at this point, if there are no more comments for the public hearing, I would seek a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second? Any discussion, or all those in favor?
Yes.
Okay, so the public hearing is now closed, although certainly we are continuing to take feedback all the way up until and beyond when we vote the budget next week. So at this point, do we have a student council report? Welcome.
Good evening. My name is William Dion. And yes, I'm here on behalf of the Hopkins High School Student Council. So not a whole ton happening right now, sort of after the break. However, we are preparing for the midterms. So those are coming up from the January 22nd to the 25th. And following that is a homework-free weekend. And second semester starts on January 28th. And with that, each class will be having a meeting sort of about upcoming events and all that. Additionally, the principal, Mr. Evan Bishop, our Hopkins High School's principal, sent out a school climate survey. And so he sent it out to all of his students sort of to seek feedback upon the school environment and what he can do better as a principal. So we will be seeing results for that soon, and hopefully I can bring those to you at a later date. Additionally, sports, our winter sports teams are doing pretty well. So the track team is looking strong, and I know girls basketball is playing game tonight, and boys basketball is playing tomorrow night. Additionally, we have an upcoming robotics competition on January 20th. Also, the student council is running Putting for Patients on March 8th. So I know it's a bit far out, but we just wanted to let everyone know that it is an event run by the Jimmy Fund. It's a mini golf event in the high school gym, and it's open to the not just high school students, but everyone. And of course, it's for a good cause. So keep an eye out on social media for more updates to follow. Additionally, MLK Day will be coming up on January 21st, so a day of service. And also, something pretty cool that some teachers got to take part in recently was that 9 teachers shadowed students, sort of to get a perspective from the student's point of view, how the school day works for the student. They brought their observations and their findings to the staff meeting, just to get a better sense of what the student life is like. And that's all we have. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming in. I know it's always a busy time of
Yeah.
year, but I know midterms is weighing on everybody's
Yeah.
mind coming
Yeah.
up, so.
Yeah.
Good luck with those.
Thank you.
I
Thank
have
you.
a question for
Yeah,
you,
yeah,
if
of
that's
course.
okay. You talked about teachers shadowing students. I think that's a fantastic thought.
Yeah.
How did that go? Were students themselves, or were you?
Yeah, so I actually got the opportunity of being shadowed by Mr. Brian Prescott,
Okay.
a freshman history teacher, and it was actually a very cool experience. So at first I was a little hesitant just because I didn't really know what that would look like or sort of feel like, but when I actually did it, I decided to let him do it, and then it was really cool. I mean, especially because Mr. Prescott, for those of you who don't know, was a student here once, 10 or 12 years ago. So he said it was a little strange seeing some of his teachers again in the classroom, but I don't know, we had some interesting conversations about how teachers see things and sort of how students see things, and hopefully we can continue to work together to make a better school environment.
Fantastic. Congratulations on the whole process and whoever came up with this idea, and Mr. Bishop's leadership, of course, who continues to promote this culture of being better all the time. Fantastic.
Yeah. Well, thank you again.
Thanks, Will. I'm going to take new business A out of order here.
Of course.
Chief Lee and Chief Slamon, if you guys would like to come up, we'll take you out of order unless you have a burning desire to sit through the next parts. You are special, and we appreciate having you guys come in to explain all this to us, so this is great.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello. So I will just introduce Chief Slayman and Chief Lee. I recently met with them and the tech person on the town side, as well as with Mr. Ghosh, who is our technology director. And the subject of our conversation really was giving emergency personnel access to the cameras inside our public schools. And we talked an awful lot about the situation under which we would have access to the cameras in our schools, and those are outlined in the agenda for tonight, and I will let you talk a little bit about it because you know a lot more about that than I do.
I think just I'm going to turn it to my security expert here in a second, but just for emergency management's sake, we're constantly reaching out to see what collaborations we can work on to community preparedness. Has been a big echo in the last couple of years. We've done quite a bit through Marathon, where we will learn a lot about technology and security and where we can kind of use force multipliers because our limited resources and what we can get the most out of them. So against that background of my security expert helps me realize how we can get some improvements, and I'll let Chief Lee take over from there.
Okay. Thank you. Let me start by saying that working with Dr. Kavanaugh, the new leadership with the schools, I think I speak for both the chief and myself, that we have a great working relationship, and we couldn't be happier working with her, and looking forward to the future. And we make a good team. Having that been said, I just want to say the technology's been there in the school for some time now. The school's IT department has done an unbelievable job of setting up these cameras, and also being able to feed the cameras into what we call public safety dispatch. Now that public safety dispatch is for both police and fire. and we have several monitors inside the station. And, the goal is not to be monitoring the school. Quite frankly, we wouldn't be able to do that with just 2 dispatches, because we also have cameras for other town buildings as well. The goal is, if there's an incident, God forbid, an active shooter, we get a call from the school, or outside the school, our immediate goal is to identify where that threat is. And if we can pinpoint that through communication from the school, we got great systems in place now, but the video would enhance that if we were able to track the movements of a suspect inside the building, and, as we say, direct the threat towards them and take out that threat. It's something that, if that technology's there, why not utilize that? I quite frankly, if there was an incident and we didn't utilize that technology, then there'd probably be a lot of questions asked. I know there might be some sensitivity to the cameras, and like I said, that it'd only be monitored in an emergency situation or a call for a suspicious person, things of that nature. Alarms at night, someone trying to break into the schools. We just want to be prepared as much as possible. Public safety dispatch, they are highly trained. They see sensitive information all the time, all day long, like police officers, and they've all have much training on that, and the confidentiality agreements, things of that sort. We've also developed policies within the police department as far as monitoring information, kind of giving information out, who should have access to certain things, and that will certainly be in play. And we would have the technology to determine if someone was looking out of school when they weren't supposed to. So it's a professional system, and I can assure that we certainly would have the pieces in place to make sure that the system is only used for what it is intended for, which is an emergency situation, to pinpoint that threat and save lives if it ever comes to something like that someday. So with that, I'll take any questions you may have of the chief.
I don't have any questions, but I did want to make a couple of comments. One is, we are so fortunate to have both of you and your departments in town. It's hard to imagine a town that has better public safety and first responders in town. But seems like there's really no downside to this, that the cameras, I know, don't point to anything that's not really a public area anyway. Yes. And I know that it's not being used in any way that it's not like we're trying to catch students at anything, but it's to protect our students, our teachers, and our building and everything here. And like you said, God forbid something bad ever did happen. To have the ability to get your people in the right place is a huge, huge bonus. And shame on us if we didn't try to enhance as much as we can to keep our students safe. So that was my comment. I don't know if people have questions.
I just wanted to comment. I know last year you helped host a public safety forum for the town, and it was just really impactful to hear all the work that you guys do all the time, and to know that you're sort of out in front looking for new opportunities to keep our staff safe, our students safe. It really makes a difference, and I just want to thank you. I think this is something, as Nancy said, that the cameras are already there, and if you can leverage that technology to be more effective in what you do to minimize threats, I think it's a win for us. So thank you.
That was a great event.
I personally appreciate that you two also are very approachable. I think that's very important part of people feeling comfortable coming up with any concerns or what have you. So if any parents have any questions and whatnot about what this might entail, who is the best person to reach out? I know people have had the chance to look at the agenda ahead of time. I don't know if we have received any questions or comments, but if anyone or even students were curious, what does that mean to me now that the police can actually view it, but only under certain conditions, yes. Correct? So who should they reach out to?
Well, I think because they're school personnel, they can certainly reach out to me.
Okay.
That would be fine.
Thank you.
But if anybody from the public has any questions about our public safety dispatch, we on a daily basis give tours of the facility, and we have a lot of students that come through the building, and you know, they enjoy the public safety dispatch, probably second to the cell block. Although you can't compete with the fire trucks.
Yeah, but I'm fully in support of the proposal made here. I think it's in the right direction. There's
Yes.
no doubt.
When we realized this was an opportunity, I mean, we've spent so much time, money, effort, resources on the cameras that it's just really appropriate to use them to, you know, their maximum potential. So I think this made really great sense. So when we realized that this was a possibility, we immediately organized a meeting and got everything into place, because it's really important to keep our kids safe every day.
Dr. Kavanaugh, presumably on a some regular basis, annually or biannually, you would receive a report or work together to see the number of times they've been utilized, if at all.
So Josh Grissetti is the person on the town side who runs the technology, and he had said that he can run a report anytime to see, you know, when they're utilized and why.
And just to reinforce the point, because I think in conversations this came up one more time, this isn't to keep an eye on the students. It's not in any way just to see what's going. It's not, you know, monitoring what's going on with the kids. This is only if there's a situation that we need to bring in.
And in fact,
sort of public safety officers, whatever, you know.
A good example, and in fact, say there was like a fight in the hallway or an assault between students, we wouldn't access those cameras. We would do it like we normally do with any investigation and obtain a warrant to get the information to keep it above board.
Right. Just to kind of put everybody's concerns about that to rest, right? It's not to watch the kids. This is for emergency situations.
Absolutely.
And it makes sense. We need it in an emergency situation.
We're trying to work in other areas of the community with private businesses. Out in 495, there's cameras, and again, we wouldn't monitor them at all, but when there's an emergency, if we have the ability to access something to get earlier awareness, then we send appropriate resources, and it gives a calming effect to a lot of people just that that's happening out there. Right. So I hope with technology and security improving that this will actually get broader as we go through the years.
I would guess maybe it's a deterrent from potentially bad things happening in the school. People know that you guys are able to access into our video feed.
It can give you a deterrent effect, and it can give you a calming effect, hopefully.
Yes,
it can actually make you feel more secure.
Mm-hmm. So, I want to read the consideration for the camera so people at home who are not following along can be aware before we vote what we're voting on. For consideration is to enhance situational awareness. The superintendent recommends the school committee move to grant the Hopkinton Police Department and Hopkinton Fire Department access to exterior and interior cameras during times of suspicious activity, the sounding of any alarm, or endangerment to students and/or school personnel. The intent is to use technology to aid the call for service. Discretion as to when to monitor the cameras lies with the Hopkinton public safety officials and any additional first responders. So I would seek a motion to approve this agreement between the Hopkinton Police Department, Hopkinton Fire Department, and Hopkinton Public Schools relating to the use of exterior and interior cameras in the school buildings.
So moved.
Motion by Mina, second?
Second.
Second by Jen. All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. Yes. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you
appreciate
very
it.
much.
Yes, and
Appreciate
thank you
it.
for the work. It's been great.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Kavanaugh, for bringing this up.
That collaboration is so important for all of us. So, thank you. I guess we'll backtrack a little bit back to the rest of our reports, and we can move into your report. Okay.
So my report this evening is on my formative evaluation. As you know, in the state of Massachusetts, the superintendent's evaluation is public. Halfway through a superintendent's first year, you do go through the formative evaluation process. And I'm not sure that everyone understands what that looks like, so I have a couple of slides here just to describe it. In the state of Massachusetts, there's a rubric by which superintendents are evaluated. And it's kind of important, I think, to understand that the rubric is made up of standards. So that's what you see in the blue boxes across the top. Under each standard, there is a variety of indicators. So you see the first one there that says A, curriculum indicator, but there would obviously be B, C, D, E as you go down standard 1. And then these smaller numbers here are the ones that we call elements. When you actually look at the rubric, and a rubric is only a rubric if there are gradations. So what you see there is that very first element. This is 1A1. And it really talks about designing lessons for students. And so you can see that the rankings go from unsatisfactory to exemplary. And the language that you see under each one of those categories are actually called descriptors. So a proficient descriptor for somebody in the 1A1 standard space unit design is someone who provides support and assistance for administrators to learn and employ effective strategies for ensuring that educators and educator teams design standard space unit with measurable outcomes and challenging tasks requiring higher order thinking. Frequently monitors and assesses progress, providing feedback as necessary. So that is one single descriptor for one single element. So you may be wondering how many of those there are. There are 4 standards, as you could see. Overall, there are 20 indicators and there are 42 elements by which superintendents are evaluated. Then, the second part of the superintendent's evaluation is that there are goals. And what is required is that a superintendent propose at least 4 goals for the upcoming year. 2 to 4 of them should be district improvement goals. 1 should be a student learning goal, and 1 should be a professional practice goal. So, I will give you the materials I brought. Pass them around. Sure. I think there's one for Ned Tyler there too. Okay. Let you undo that one.
Oh, is this, oh, it's the whole packet.
Whole packet. Everyone gets one.
I feel you, Dr. Kavanaugh, I feel you.
Jen's already making fun.
I know.
Okay.
I'm not making fun. Definitely not.
So what I've done with this packet is I have included a few things. The very first thing that you see on top are the 5 goals that I had established back in August and that you had approved then. The second document is your own copy of the Massachusetts Model System for Educator Evaluation. The third part of this, and you can read this at your leisure, is where I sort of go through and take a look at those elements, and I pretty much do it at the indicator level so that you can sort of see where I assess the district to be at this point in time. And then the last thing where we'll spend a little bit of time is my entry findings report. So let's start by going through the goals update.
Dr. Kavanaugh, if you don't mind helping, everyone as to why we are doing it right now.
Oh, I see. Sure. So what happens is when you are in your first 3 years, whether you're a teacher, an administrator, or a superintendent, you have sort of single year evaluations. And so halfway through your first year, you have a formative evaluation. And so January sort of being a mid-mark for us, as our student council friend just told us that we'll be switching in the semester in January. So this really is sort of a mid-mark for us in the school year, which makes it an appropriate time to present the formative assessment data. So this is my, oops, I'm not sure why we're on goal 4. I apologize.
Dr. Kavanaugh,
Yes.
is this informative tonight? There's no action on our part tonight other than
No
to
action.
absorb.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
I'm just delivering information. In fact, closer to the end, I was going to suggest that after I go through this, you just take it and digest it. We had agenda planning today, and we suggested that maybe you could offer me feedback publicly when we come back in the first meeting in February. And that gives you 3 weeks to take any of this. If there's anything that I present that you have questions about, or if there's any sort of evidence or information that you would like to stop into central office or that I could email to you, I'm happy to do that. All right, so the first goal is a district improvement goal. And the district improvement goal is the one where I am doing the work around creating a new 3-year district strategy. So to just sort of let you know where I am right now, in the entry findings report, you're going to see that most of the data that I had promised to analyze will be there. Number 2, by October 31st, I would conduct a listening tour. I think it actually took me a little bit longer than October 31st, but I have met with all of those groups except for the ones who are yellow highlighted. I mean, some of the reasons why I didn't meet with the yellow highlighted people are just we don't have an LPAC. For whatever reason, we just didn't connect with the HPTA, so, but all of the other ones I did in fact meet with, and maybe even a couple more that were not originally listed. By December 31st, observe classrooms throughout the district and interact with faculty, collecting, hear, and see data. And I have done that both formally and informally, I think, over the last few years. And by January 31st, establish focus groups whose mission it is to use findings to write portions of the strategic plan. This date may need to be pushed out a little bit. I have contracted with one of the DESE consultants who comes out to do strategic planning with districts, and so she's going to formally run the focus groups in the district for us, and I think that that's probably one of the smarter things to do, because then you don't let your subjectivity kind of cloud things.
Dr. Kavanaugh, I know that you've had, every day is so busy and packed for you, and it's budget season, first budget season for you too. The ones highlighted in yellow, do you plan to meet them in the near future?
We did meet with the HPTA, but I think that they were interested in HPA doings, sort of the business of the HPTA. Okay. If there is an LPAC, I would be happy to meet with the LPAC. And I would also be happy to reach out to any cultural alliances.
Just to be clear, the LPAC is English language learners?
Yes. The state now tells us that we have to form an LPAC, and it's English Learner Parent Advisory Group. We do not have one in place yet. So one of the things that I am thinking is the January 31st, we may have focus groups in place, but we will probably not actually have those focus groups happen until we get closer to, February or March. And just in communication with the consultant, we had talked a lot about having the district admin team do some of the work ahead of time to just sort of frame some of the topics that we would want focus groups to surround. Tuesday, on the 8th of January, I did have an admin council meeting where we spent a lot of time thinking about what are the really important things in our district right now. Are things like curriculum, instruction, communication, budget, finance, all of those things. And I think we've had some very good communication around that. So the second one is a professional practice goal. This is the culture and diversity work that we started to do way back in August. And so you will recall in August we had conducted a survey. We surveyed parents, students, faculty, and alumni to sort of think about the professional learning that we would be doing throughout the year. In August, we were able to meet with a consultant, Khalees Wernham, who was planning to be with us also on November 13th, January 8th, and March 12th. She has been unable to fulfill her obligations to us, and so she is no longer working with the district. We are still doing all of the work that we started in ADL, and Jen and I are actually going to a culture and diversity full day on a Saturday coming up. And, continuing to address issues, concerns, reading, TED Talks, all of those things in our admin council meetings. Typically what happens in an admin council meeting is that we will spend a little bit of our time looking at culture and diversity. We are still doing our book studies with Everyday Anti-Racism and Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. We've added some other things along the way to that. New York Times articles, TED Talks, that kind of thing. But it's been generating some, I think, excellent dialogue, and I think that we have been thinking very hard about what it means to, sort of be really culturally proficient. And that was the work that Khalees had started with us in August. What does cultural proficiency look like? I do have some samples of things that I can either send to you down the table, or I can, hang on to those and I can share them in other ways, just in case you don't want to take up too much time with all of that tonight. And then, as you know, one of the things that doesn't appear in this document is the Culture and Diversity Forums, and we have done 2 of those. I think that those were December 13th and maybe September 30th.
Dr. Kavanaugh, what's the best way to ask you further questions as you share this?
Oh, if you want to ask right now, that would be perfect.
Okay. So you, in the key process benchmarks number 5, you haven't given any update for some reason.
Are we on?
The goal 2, building the repertoires of admin, faculty, and staff.
Key benchmarks, number 5.
Yes.
Goal number 2?
Goal number 2, key process benchmarks, point number 5.
Communicate with survey respondents who have reached out to me for follow. Oh, yes, you know what? I probably should have said that that's sort of how I found some of the people for the panel when we did the Culture and Diversity Forum.
You know, one thing that has that stuck with me of the talks that came up at the diversity forum that you had the second one, it's not out of my mind. The speaker took such a wonderful analogy. He talked about this work being like dental hygiene, that you have to take care of it every day.
Yes.
You have to attend to it, and so I think those things are powerful. So how can we figure out what's the best way to measure? You know, we do see teachers and we do see administrators being there, and especially the second forum, I thought, hearing the students speak and the teachers, and it was a very good participation, I thought. So how do we measure that there is a true change?
One of the things that that I think I've done is conduct surveys with the admin team. I don't actually do it with all of the teachers because I feel like that's sort of next layer down. My interaction is predominantly with the administrative team. And, you know, I mean, I guess we could conduct surveys around like the ADL, but I think that this is one of those things that's very hard to measure because, you know, it's the way sort of people behave and people feel. And sometimes I think that people, you know, when we did the second Culture and Diversity Forum, we said we always have to consider that people are coming from a place of good intentions. And I think that that's how people approach things. And sometimes unwittingly we say things or we do things that have an adverse effect on the listener, right? But we're unaware that we're doing that.
Exactly.
On the full PD day at the high school, they had an ed camp sort of format, and one of the ed camp sessions was about culture and diversity, and the room was pretty packed. There were quite a few high school teachers and I think middle school teachers who attended that, and what was lovely in that session is that you could sort of see that there was I think varying levels of proficiency. Some people wanted more, some people felt very confident to speak. So for me, it's hard to measure because I think some people would even respond in ways that are confident even if they don't necessarily have the proficiency that they assume that they have. Some people may not respond with that kind of confidence even though they have markedly high proficiency. Do you know what I mean?
Right. And I'm wondering when would be an appropriate time to have a follow-up survey, and would that be a decent measure? I don't know, just throwing it out there. Like, I know we just had it, right? And you've just, not that this work hasn't been happening, but you have made it a priority, right? And it takes time to see change of this nature. So when would be an appropriate time to measure from that perspective, perhaps?
Do you mean a district-wide survey?
Right.
Well, I would say that I'm a little reluctant to do that in that one of the things that when we started the work, we had agreed that it was really about informing the work for administrators to sort of identify, you know, were there voices where people were expressing that they had some difficulty. And so was it a problem big enough to warrant the kind of work that we're doing? But we had also agreed, I thought, that this was not necessarily sort of scientific, embedded in quantitative data. So to put it out there again, I'm not sure that we're going to sort of see the growth that we want in a scientific kind of way.
Right. But I'm again, just throwing it out there that typically surveys could, but if you have to standardize. I think the first one you said was simply a test and kind of get the measure and kind of be even aware that these issues exist and kind of open the box a little bit. So I just want you to think about this a little bit, that if you were to standardize a survey, the language, and whether with the help of, a professional or what have you, could that be used as a measure? Because ultimately, how do we know that the change is happening and is impacting all the pain that we heard in the surveys? We have to make that, we have to lessen that, right? We have to move in that right direction.
Yeah, maybe I will sort of share something with you. So one of the things that I have just shared with the administrators recently, I have a friend who is Serbian. He and his wife are both Serbian, and he's a professor at Holy Cross. A lot of the work that he does, he started out as a philosopher, but for the last several years he's been doing peace studies, and he travels to India very frequently and works there. So he had put together a collection. It was just journal entries that were sort of his recollections, or of his last trip through India. And when I got to the epilogue of his book, I thought, this is exactly the kind of thing that I would like for our administrators to think about as we're doing this kind of diversity work. So I'm just going to read for you that last little part of his epilogue, because to me, this is what the work is about, right? I don't know that I want to measure it so much as I want to just kind of keep it in the forefront of everybody's daily life. Anyway, my friend, whose name is Predrag Chikovatsky, says, so I should contextualize this for you. He was giving a speech or a talk in India in a college that he said was in probably a very rural area, and it was, a group of people who were probably not very affluent. He had done a series of these talks, and he said this one, and it was sort of magical for him because he kind of likes to be in those places where people are eager to learn and don't have the kind of affluence or that sort of scholarly way about them. So at the end, somebody asks him about mystical experiences, and he says, I continued after another pause, I do not consider an experience in which I lose myself a mystical one. Quite the contrary, for me, a mystical experience is the one in which I find myself as a human being and come closer to confronting the real. And I find myself most when I have a genuine encounter with another human being. The fact that you and I, of different ages, cultures, religions, skin colors, and personal experiences, the fact that the two of us can have this sincere and engaged dialogue, this for me is a miracle, a mystical experience. Us being here together, listening and trying to learn from each other, this is what truly matters. And we listen the best and learn the most in the presence of those who are different than we are. This is what calls for the affirmation of reality, for the reverential attitude toward this mysterious gift of being alive and enhancing our humanity. So that is one of the things that I have recently shared with the admin team. And I mean, I read that, I get goosebumpy about it, because I do think that that's the real work, right? It's not the kind of thing that, I guess surveys dictate, or it's just bringing people together and sharing humanity. And I think we have to get more comfortable in our own skin doing that. I don't know.
Very well written.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
He's really smart. Yeah, and I think, so when we did the first survey, there were angry voices and you could hear them, right? But you don't have a face associated with that, and you worry about the lines on that screen and are those people very angry? But I think when you saw those kids delivering those same kinds of messages, there's not anger. It's just, I need to be heard, right? And that's what this speaks to, bringing our humanity together and listening to one another. So. Moving on to goal number 3. Okay. All right, so goal number 3 is the professional practice goal, and this is just the one where I do all of the new superintendent induction program work. I have, in accordance with all of this, I meet monthly with my mentor. We meet for about 6 hours a month. I have attended all of the NISIP meetings. August 10th, October 3rd, November 14th, and January 9th are all complete. I have written an entry plan, and I have written a findings document that we'll talk about tonight. I think I am earning proficient ratings on all of my assignments. And the reflect on and professionally learned from my mentor's visits. My mentor has obviously come to a school committee meeting, and he has come to an admin council meeting, and he and I also visited the middle school, and I want to thank Mr. Keller for that, because Mr. Keller provided an phenomenal tour of sort of different learning, and it was all in science and math classrooms, and you could see just different kinds of instructional models happening. We were in classrooms where we saw, sort of the highest achievers in the Hopkinton Public Schools, and we saw kids who were struggling. We saw co-taught classrooms. We saw classrooms where voice and choice were offered, and it was just a really amazing tour. And I think my mentor thinks Mr. Keller is very special, so, and he is. So that's where I am with that one.
I also think, I just want to add this, that, building your own repertoire, I've seen you work with other district leaders and reach out to them and not hesitate learning from your colleagues in other districts. So maybe that's something you should consider adding.
Yes, and that's actually very commonplace among superintendents. I bet every day I can get 1 to 2 emails where people will reach out and ask a question about, what does your preschool look like, or what does, just all kinds of questions that we solicit information from each other, and it's a really nice network of support. All right, this is my student achievement goal. The student achievement goal is really based on our worry that the state is now looking at the lowest 25% of our learners, and for the very first time, the 10th graders at the high school are going to take the new MCAS test. And so we want to make sure that our lowest 25% by the previous MCAS, that's how you determine your lowest 25%, are ready for that test. And so I have been working with the special education department at the high school as well as the English department at the high school, just making sure that there's good communication between those two groups. And quite honestly, not every student who's in the lowest 25% are kids who are defined as a student with disability or a student on an IEP. And I think that, we're kind of opening the communication between the two departments, but also taking a look at what is the new testing going to look like, and what does good writing instruction look like. So I have met with them on September 14th, November 6th, and the third meeting with them will be on February 1st. I did have a smaller meeting with just special educators, and I met with the special educators sort of in isolation to ensure that they had a good understanding of what was expected, because I didn't want them to worry that their focus could only be on writing instruction or English language arts writing instruction. I would like to see everybody doing writing across the curriculum. So what does it look like when students write in social studies? What does it look like when students write in science? And I understand that when you're a special educator, you're not just worried about writing, but you're worried about students in reading and math and, some of the soft skills. I mean, do you have your binder in your backpack can often be a question. So I didn't want them to think that this was going to occupy all of their time, but I did want to impress upon them the importance of kids being able to approach this test with, a few more tools in their toolbox. Every time I meet with the combined groups, both special education and English, I do send out a survey. So I've conducted 2 of the 3 surveys, and I have gotten feedback from them. I do have some samples of student work. I did not attach samples of student work, but we have some portfolios, and that's what we'll actually be looking at. So we'll use the looking at student work protocol for the February 1st session that we will have here. And I have actually put all of these materials sort of together myself, and I'm kind of hoping that people are appreciating that. So let's hope it goes where I want it to, or where we all want it to.
Excuse me.
Yes. And that's actually a goal that I sort of share with Dr. Zaleski, so she's been very helpful in that work as well. And the last one is goal number 5, and that was the goal that I had put together around the budget. And I think that you've sort of been along for the ride to watch that whole thing unfold. Again, you can see that yellow highlighting because we did not get our NASDAQ data until very, very recently. But most of what you see here has already been completed, and I think the important thing for me was that this budget is a budget that is really based in student need in a lot of the things that we sort of saw unfolding as I went through the entry finding report. And I feel like this will be a budget that can get us into next year with some safety, as long as, and we know from last week that it's predicated really on at least 100 new kids coming into the district, but sort of an equal distribution across 13 grade levels. So that will need to be in place for this particular budget to be as effective as we hope it will be.
Dr. Patty, sorry. I just have 2 questions. I apologize. I didn't get them in the flow because I have to process first.
No, that's fine.
On your strategic goal, the first one, process-wise, is there going to be a delegate from school committee who's working in a committee on strategy, or is this being done more by the admin team?
So I think that, and this is a very good question. One of the elements on the rubric sort of talks about how do you get buy-in from your admin team. So when I met with them on January 8th, one of the things I said to them, they said, will there be a steering committee? And I said, I really feel like that has to be sort of the work of this group here, and that doesn't preclude anyone from being part of focus group work or, you know, sort of taking this plan in different directions. But I think that if we are going to commit ourselves to looking at things like teaching and learning and budget and all of those things, we really have to make sure that those are the things that this admin team believes in. So one of the administrators did say, will there be a steering committee? And I had to say, I think that we will sort of be our sort of collective steering committee here. And when we start rolling out focus groups, the consultant from DESE will take this thing right out to the community for us. And, you know, at that point, yes, there'll be administrators or teachers or school committee members or parents or all kinds of people who are part and parcel of the focus groups. But I think that one of the things that we will hope to do is to kind of create very broad topics.
Is that, according to the consultant, is that sort of a typical process?
That's sort of a typical process.
To not have like a broader steering committee?
Yes. And in fact, that's one of the things that she had discussed with us because she came to the January 8th meeting to sort of meet everybody and have this dialogue. But one of the things that we find is if there's a steering committee that has, you know, 2 parents, 1 school committee members, 3 administrators, then those 3 administrators may go back to, you know, Hopkins or Elmwood or the middle school, but without representation from that entire team in going through that initial process. Very often people say, oh, that's really nice, you did a good job on that, and sometimes it's not even sort of read or fostered or loved or valued, and it ends up on a shelf somewhere. So having as much administrator buy-in in the beginning as we can is really important, if they are that sort of layer that moves this thing forward for 3 years.
So will there be interim reports to school committee on how things are shaping up? Or
Sure.
will it be
Absolutely.
sort of at the end, we'll sort of see it and then vote on it in its entirety?
Oh, no, I don't think that we'll just go from here to, it's April,
Sure, yes.
surprise.
So
Yeah.
it might be helpful to maybe if we outline and discuss the process so that we all can understand where, because this is a different process than what we used the last time we did the strategic plan, just so that we can all
Okay, so yeah,
understand that, just separate from the, I don't want to derail your.
no, that's okay. The consultant did, and I have not looked at it because it's been a busy couple of days, but she had sent me sort of I guess, a very sort of loose timeline to see what we thought about, all of the events that will take place between sort of now and June 30th. And I think that, as I send that out to administrators, I'm happy to send it to the 5 of you as well. It makes good sense.
Sorry, my only other question was on the diversity goal. I know that when you were forming the goals, we talked about metrics and the idea of curriculum changes reflecting, being reflected, and that it was too early in the first year because there's still sort of an onboarding of the messaging and understanding the topic. But I know at the forums, at least I think the first forum, there were definitely pockets in the district where there are curriculum modifications being incorporated based on new awareness of biases in our materials. So I'm just wondering, although it's not specifically a metric, I'm wondering if when you report back on this goal, if you could maybe share any awareness you have of curriculum modifications, because I do think that is one measurable thing that makes an impact in the classroom. When students can see themselves in the curriculum more readily, I think it makes a big difference. And I know it's happening. I found it in Elmwood in certain pockets. And I'm sure as you're talking with people, they're sort of self-reflecting on their own teaching. And I mean, our teachers are so dedicated. I'm sure as they're taking this message on, it's sort of a natural process. But if we're aware of anything, it'd be good to know.
Sure. Yeah, and Jen, you should probably speak to this. So we did actually have a student in the middle school who approached the administration and said, I don't ever see myself in the curriculum. And so Jen went to a meeting with that student and Mr. Keller. So do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, it was a 6th grade student who was incredibly bright and articulate and said he'd been feeling this way really throughout his journey in the public schools. And he wanted to know what could be done about this. So could we add a class? What kinds of things could be done? His point was when we talk about African Americans specifically in our curriculum, we talk about the challenges, some of the downfalls, some of the unfortunate circumstances that they face throughout history, and why aren't we talking about some of the great African American leaders and people that have really made a very positive impact that he as a student would see as a role model. So we talked a little bit about some of the work that's been done. He shared with us a book that he'd been reading that his parents had gotten for him, talking about African Americans and Latin Americans throughout history. And so Mr. Keller and I jotted down the information about that because it talked a little bit in that book he shared with us about implications for a classroom. One of the things that Mr. Keller offered to him, in addition to, I think, kind of what Carol talked about earlier, is, and I think what you're referencing is our continued work at looking at curriculum and figuring out ways to address the things that he raised. The middle school has a peer mentoring group that began this year that focuses specifically on kind of a culture and diversity kind of through their work with the ADL. I'm probably not explaining it exactly the right way, but it has to do with challenges with culture and backgrounds and things like that that students may bring to the forefront. So Mr. Keller immediately got the students set up with one of the assistant principals who's running that group and talked about some planning for that student to help become a peer leader in that area in the school for next year when he's a 7th grader. And we also touched a little bit on the diversity forum that Carol put together earlier in the year with, you were all there with the student voices, and we talked about thinking about ways to share the student voice at the middle school level as well as the high school level. So, we didn't have any hard and fast answers for him. It's not something we can fix or, come to any kind of answer tomorrow, but I think the heightened awareness, sharing his message out with the faculty so they're aware of it, those are the kinds of things we can begin working with. But it was a very impressive young man and a really powerful conversation.
I think it's great that he was able to articulate that. I think it's definitely something that students feel for any number of reasons. I mean,
Yes.
So it's great that we have a representative in the student body who can articulate that, and thank you for listening to him. But I think I'm hoping, based on other things I've heard anecdotally, that we do more of that, more reflecting on our curriculum choices. And
well, one thing I can add, if you don't mind, that he mentioned, so I'd met at some point with Mr. Hay earlier in the year, and we were talking about the music program, And he mentioned that based on feedback that he'd received from students, that they were really expanding the repertoire of musical pieces in the band and some of the musical performances. And this student that we'd met with actually is a musician, and he has an older brother at the high school. And he told me that his mother had commented on the change in type of music that was being performed this year, and that his mother was so impressed that, oh my God, I can't believe they knew that composer, and that they've incorporated that in the music program. So that's, you know, another type of curriculum change that we're starting to see.
Thank you.
I love hearing when, not to jump in, but when students bring their voice forward at that age, it's really particularly impressive. So.
And so the last thing I think I would like to talk about tonight is the entry findings report. For tonight, I think I'll just walk through it very quickly with you. So in the introduction, I describe why a person would undertake this. And even though I've been in the district for a couple of years, I think it's really important to sort of step back and take a look at all of the quantitative data, but also go through the district and go through the community and really listen to voices so that I can hear what's important to people. When the admin team went through this document, I don't want to use the word struggled, but we looked at this and we thought, well, are the voices that you hear in here representative of great big numbers of people? Do a lot of people feel this way? And one of the things that we talked about was if we have people who were willing to come out and willing to have their voices heard, then it's very important to them. And I think it's just important for us to listen to what people have to say, whether it's, you know, a majority of parents, a minority of parents, but just by virtue of the fact that people had things to say, I think it was important when these themes started to emerge that I would put them all together. So I start out by also including our current mission statement, vision statement, and core values. And then I define the process, which you already know a whole lot about. The next section just goes through the current state of the district, and it's sort of that 30,000-foot view. How many schools do we have? Who goes to those schools? We're having some budgetary growing pains because we are becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger school district. Who are the students who go here just in terms of enrollment data, and where do they go when they leave the Hopkinton Public Schools? I talk a little bit about how important social emotional learning has been for us over the last 5 years, and that some of our social emotional and behavioral work ties in with our culture and diversity work. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is that our students are feeling safe and cared for, and if they feel those ways, then they can certainly better access our curriculum. I talk a little bit about the educators who are in our buildings every day. We are really blessed to have a very stable and talented administrative team, a very talented teaching force, and kids who are, you know, by and large, just very, very good kids. I frequently tell the story of, you know, just being in classrooms, and when the bell rings and students leave, they will very often say to the teacher in the classroom, "Thank you." And for me, that speaks volumes to, you know, their care for public education and their care for the people who are teaching them. So at the start of this, I have all of the qualitative data, and if several people said it to me, I actually thought it was important enough to include. So I went through those topics and I just put them in here alphabetically, so that's the reason for the organization. The first is budget and town finance. One of the things that I heard coming to me very frequently were things about the budget and how we are growing rapidly. There's a need for buildings, and people are worried about the budget sort of keeping pace with the demands of the schools. And I even heard that from students here at the high school. So during that listening tour, it was kind of amazing to me that 14-year-olds had that same concern. People said, you know, we've done a very good job of holding back the tide, but we've lived with this sort of year-to-year mentality. We think about, well, what did FY19 look like? What will FY20 look like? But it probably makes a whole lot better sense to start projecting out for several years and thinking about where we're going to need to be in 3 years or 4 years. The explosion in population was something that was of great concern to people because there's been this expansion of high-priced homes. But there are several people who have lived here for a very long time and hope that the town maintains its affordability. And among those people are probably some of our elderly people who would like to be able to age in place, and they want to be able to, for that to be affordable to them. Project Just Because reported to me that there's probably a very large untapped client base out there, but people's individual and family pride keeps them from reaching out to Project Just Because. But even while that sort of story is being presented, we have historically been a district that doesn't really frequently say no to things. So we have a new highway department, a new library, new public schools, and we continue to add. At the end of the day, one person said to me that she thought it was really important that we just have a one Hopkinton mindset, and I kind of liked that language, so I incorporated that. In terms of buildings and grounds, I think that we are all aware that the high school is very close to capacity on a daily basis, that the middle school in Elmwood probably could use a little bit of a facelift. The students who are at the high school were very, very funny when they were describing the middle school. So they come to the high school and they say, looking back, that middle school. But I guess when you're living in it, you don't actually recognize what it looks like. But overcrowding, I think, in terms of building and grounds is our big concern. Pretty much to a one, parents reported that they feel like communication coming out of our buildings is excellent. Principals in this district are constantly using Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, newsletters, whatever it is that they can push information out to people. And I think that that's been very effective. I also get a lot of feedback about culture. And I thought some of the feedback I got about culture was very lovely. One person said that Hopkinton has enjoyed a nice brand, and another person told me that Hopkinton not only brings the sizzle, but also delivers the steak. And I thought that was a really nice way to say, while we enjoy, I think, like a really lovely reputation statewide, I think that our kids leave here very well prepared. And I think that the teachers are, every single day putting forth the best effort and bringing, rigor and good programming and good instruction. So hence the steak.
Dr. Cavanaugh, on the communication one, I've heard about consistency being a concern personally as talking to people. Is that something you heard during your tour?
For me, most of the parents that I spoke to did say that they feel like they get very good communication. And I think maybe that comes consistently from the building level. Maybe from teacher to teacher in classroom, they use different methods to push out information, and so that might be the inconsistency that you're talking about.
That's exactly what I have heard.
Yes, currently in the district there is sort of no set way for any teacher to put information out to people. So whatever it is that you choose to do as an educator, that's how you send out information. And really there's also, I think, a sort of a gradual release model. So at the elementary level, lots of information goes out to parents. By the time kids are at the high school level, it's our belief that, to foster sort of autonomy and get them to a place of independence, we just send information out mostly to the kids.
What's the best way to share some specific examples about concerns on communication with you?
Oh, you can just send me an email, is fine. Or anyone in the community who would like to do that, that's perfectly fine.
There were some thoughts around the fact that, to your point, one would expect more communication when kids are younger. And, it changes. I don't think it reduces, but the model changes as they get older, right? So I think there are instances where it's a lot, because there's no policy or any set procedure on how teachers are expected to do that. I think it's on their teacher's personality, and some of them are very communicative. They use social media, they use Twitter, they use a lot of pictures. And so then you have another class where the parent hears from the other parent that, oh, you haven't seen the pictures? I'm like, no, I didn't get anything. So I think there may be a little bit of that too, and someone sharing a lot about what's going on in the classroom and the other teacher taking a different approach. So those are the things that I've heard, and if that would be something as we get into the strategic plan, I hope we look to put some kind of a guideline, if you will, on what's the minimum, right? The rest is your personality.
Yes.
I think that would be helpful. So I'll probably request, I've heard this very strongly.
Okay,
For sure, I'll share, I'll ask them to share it with you directly.
that's great, thank you. Let's see. Oh, still in culture. So there are some things that we think are affecting the climate, which in turn will affect the culture of our schools. So, you know, we have a changing demographic. We have a lot of social media out there. And I think that there are some teachers who are looking at some of that social media and thinking that a lot of it is making commentary about schools. And then the third thing that people talked about in terms of culture was that sort of threat to our kids' social, emotional, academic well-being, just because, you know, the stakes are so high all the time. And it wasn't just parents who said that. I had students who said, nope, when we come to school in the morning, we understand that, you know, this is high stakes, this is high school, we have to do our best, we have to do our best every day. So I think that that pressure is very real for our kids and our teachers.
Dr. Kavanagh, when you thought of culture, was it primarily driven by what the students are facing? How much of it is what the staff is experiencing?
Oh, yes, I think that most of what we're talking about here is what the staff is experiencing in terms of culture. You know, when we talk about the stress on kids, kids did say that, but parents said that also quite loudly.
So the teachers are comfortable with the culture that they're experiencing, their own growth and acceptance of teachers, because that's an important part of it too.
Oh, I think that the teachers feel like the culture in our buildings is excellent.
Supportive of
yes,
them
and I
too.
think that, oh yes, and I think that the principals think that as well. I mean, when we had this conversation on Tuesday about the culture in our buildings, you know, I think that the culture is very strong. People feel like they belong, they're invigorated, the principals, you know, value them, parents value them, students value them. I think that the culture here is very, very good. It's a good place to work.
That's great.
And then the only other thing that we talked about with culture was the culture of our 5 individual buildings is very different. Mm-hmm. It's no wrong culture, there's no right culture, there's no good culture, there's no bad culture, it's just different. And so if you are a kid who's used to the culture at Marathon, then when you get to Elmwood, or if you're a parent who's used to the culture at Marathon, you get to Elmwood and it's very different. And then you get to Hopkins and it's very different. I think every school sort of enjoys its own brand, but we could probably do something with a little more consistency. The next category is curriculum and instruction. I think students and parents did question a little bit of the progression of the curriculum. Would it be possible to incorporate more flexibility, more voice and choice? And I think that when we're talking about the elementary level, it's an interesting phenomenon because elementary teachers are pulling groups all day. And as they're pulling groups, there really is a lot of differentiation taking place there. But somehow in kids' minds, as they leave those places, they think that they all sort of got the same thing. They really didn't all get the same thing, but they perceived that they all got the same thing. And maybe that happens because by the time you get to the high school level, you have opportunities for, you know, orchestra or robotics or AP, U.S. history. There are just so many opportunities that it feels very, very different from the way it felt when we were building foundational skills. One of the other things that we talked a lot about was, so, you know, it's really nice to have all of that kind of differentiation, and yet, you know, we're worried at some times about offering kids reading support, offering kids math support, even though, you know, very often we are very much above the state and national norms. You know, as we kind of look at the kids in front of us, we do have to make sure that kids are reading and, you know, doing math at grade level. So you can't lose them along the way. So how do we have that kind of differentiation, offer kids voice and choice, and yet make sure that all of our kids are landing at grade level?
Dr. Kavanagh, I have some general questions and, you know, just trying to better understand that what is to be expected of kids in terms of reading and, you know, when do they pick up the skills? How much do we push them? And, you know, every child is different. Each one of us is different. So how do we set those guidelines? Are these driven by DESE? Who defines that you should be reading this by this age? And what if the child is different? Are we pushing them in a direction just because MCAS is guiding it? What is the guideline? I'm just trying to understand that.
So, and maybe you could speak to this too, but, so, you do get standards from DESE that talk about, where students should be with reading, but we also have all kinds of, and one of the things that we'll talk about in here is that sort of progress monitoring and levels where we're assessing kids all the time. Where is their reading level? If you are in the third month of second grade, this is roundabout where you should be. And what if you're not there? What does that mean? Does it mean that you're sort of a late bloomer? Does it mean that you come from a household that's not print rich, so you haven't had a whole lot of experience with language and literacy? Or does it mean that there's some undiagnosed problem? So I think that's sort of why we keep that monitoring going. You're the expert in elementary.
Well, I think we could spend an entire evening on the question, but I think kind of in simplest terms, we do use a research-based system called Fountas and Pinnell, which is based out of Lesley University with two research who are really the forerunners in literacy instruction. So when teachers start talking about, they're a level P, they're a level J, whatever it may be, our district and pretty much every district around, that's kind of the gold standard of how we measure reading progress. And it's all based on an enormous continuum of what a student should know and be able to do at level A and what they should know and be able to do at level Z. Actually, even begins before level A. And it's one data point, so that's why we have many different types of measures. We have the MCAS, we have the Fountas and Pinnell assessment system, and many more beyond that. But that's really, it's a very detailed, it's very similar to the rubric that Dr. Kavanaugh shared earlier tonight. There are many, many checkpoints that educators use before they would progress a child from reading at a level A to a level B. And it's, there are a lot of pieces that go along with that in terms of, kind of to your point, Carol's, about the differences between students. And that's why we really tend to err on the conservative side when students are younger, when they're 5 and when they're 6. Because some kids just, January or first grade, a lot of things explode.
Exactly.
Because they're finally ready.
Right, and there's parent anxiety too. When you see your friend's child going all the way up and you hear this in the classroom, this child hasn't reached there. So I feel like there are some norms around that, and I hope that we are not putting any external pressures that make kids feel less or somehow off just because they're not there yet.
And I don't think, I know for sure that's not something that we're doing intentionally, but I also can't deny that at a certain point in time, if a child realizes, my peers are exceeding my ability, but for that reason, we have interventionists, we have these leveled materials, we have support systems in place to help those children and make sure they get where they need to be.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just a couple more things on instructional concerns, and I think I'll just repeat what I had said earlier tonight, that people are looking for increased differentiation, project-based learning, personalized learning, experiential learning, links to Hopkinton senior citizens, internship opportunities for students, a formalized K-12 STEAM program, a partnership with a community college. And there were also people who said that it would be nice for more of our students to take advantage of Keefe Tech. We talked a little bit about the efficacy of the co-teaching model in special education, and it's just important for everyone to realize that that looks very differently if you are in a middle school math classroom or a second grade literacy classroom. In terms of other kinds of programs, there were people who thought that we should have a building-to-building transitional planning program, that some parents would like help with understanding the IEP, that people would like to see an upgraded 18 to 22 program, that there would be people who would like to have better outcomes for any of the soft skills, so things like guidance, school psychologists, school adjustment counselors, any of those specialized programs. If we could sort of streamline those and move the ship in perhaps one consistent direction. parents did report that stress levels are high, and when we talked about some of the ways to use SEL to mitigate some of those things at the elementary levels, people talked about using PBIS, which is Positive Behavior Intervention Systems, or responsive classroom. People talked a little bit about technology, and that was sort of a mixed bag. Some people wondered, are we in a state of hyper-technology? And other people were very pleased to say that the technology department here is exceptional, and having one-to-one devices is, just a marvelous instructional tool. And then the next section just has quantitative data. You probably have seen lots of this. The STAR data that we use it to complement the regular classroom math assessments and any other reading assessments. Sometimes we also use QRI for reading. But the nice thing I think about STAR reading and STAR math is it's helpful with progress monitoring. So when we identify that a student is struggling in either one of those areas, we can kind of see how they're doing at intervals during the year. We realize that, even though we say 90% of our kids are reading at grade level, if we think about, for example, like the 8th grade, given that size of a class, that could be 32 kids who are not reading at grade level in the 8th grade. So these kinds of progress monitoring tools are really helpful to us in being able to assess and sort of diagnose problems and then offer some kind of intervention.
Dr. Cavanaugh, I know we've moved on to the next section. One question I have on the curriculum and instruction, the last sentence talks to professional development. It was reported is lacking for paraprofessionals and specialists. Was there any conversation with substitute teachers?
We don't provide any professional development for substitute teachers beyond sort of typical school safety. No.
Thank you.
And then there's MCAS data here, which Jen had shown to you a few months ago when she did her MCAS presentation, so I won't belabor the point about that. And I have a section on equity data, so you can see some statistics regarding special education. MCAS results showing outcomes for both girls and boys in the 2018 and 2017 years, and you can see some of the places where boys, especially in literacy, are lagging. There's some social emotional learning data. The state now does vocal data for us, and they do it for the high school, the middle school, and Hopkins. So some of the outcomes for the high school, the middle school, and Hopkins are on page 17. So, for example, 57% of students say that they worry about grades, which in turn makes it hard to enjoy school. So that's something that we heard at the high school. As you read down toward Hopkins, you can sort of see that, kids don't seem to have that sort of same anxiety. And, that raises questions as to why, and maybe it's because kids are far less aware of differences in, how well I read, what I look like, what I'm good at. Or, maybe kids just haven't sort of perfected the art of unkindness. It's sort of a mixed bag there, but that might be something for us to sort of look into. The English learner data is here. In 2017, 77.5% of our district's K-8 students met their learning targets, and in 2018, it went up to 92.1% of our kids were meeting targets. Student discipline data is there, and student attendance rates. Interestingly, student discipline data sort of mirrors what happens across the state. At schools like Marathon, Elmwood, Hopkins, the incidences of these kinds of behaviors, and if you're reporting a behavior to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, it's a pretty egregious infraction. So by the time you get to the middle school and the high school, there are more incidents of discipline being reported to DESE, and I think that just sort of comes with age. That's not uncommon across the state. The last line, I think, in the first paragraph is important, because I think one of the things that we do here is we believe in educative approaches rather than punitive, and I think that our administration would say that those approaches have worked really well for Hopkinton, and I think that the DESE data does seem to validate that. And then finally, it closes with student attendance rates, that quantitative part. And I would like to encourage all parents to keep sending your children to school. because our attendance rates are higher than they should be.
Attendance or absence rates?
Oh, I'm sorry, absence rates are higher than they should be. Sorry, yes. We need higher attendance, lower absence. There we go.
Dr. Kavanaugh, the vocal data on for HHS, 57% of students saying they worry about their grades, which in turn makes it hard to enjoy school. That's a big number, 57%.
That's a big number. It is.
And that 15% say they have stayed home because they felt unsafe at, or that they've been picked on or teased by peers because of their real or perceived sexual preferences. Both of those
Yes.
are sizable numbers.
They are, and, we put them in the report because it's something that, we
Needs
want
to
to
be
address.
addressed,
Yes.
absolutely.
I mean, this could be sort of glassy and pretty and tied up with a bow, but I think putting the reality out there is something that helps us to grow as a district.
Absolutely, it's appreciated. On the student discipline data, where you said this is typical, the jump from, say, elementary, where you're talking about 1 or 2 kids, and then middle school 8 and high school 30. I'm wondering how much of it is, kids being vocal and actually being ready to report it, right? Versus, how many take the step to report it, right? So I'm just wondering, are we doing what we need to do to address this before we reach that state where we reach to the 30 number?
In the discipline category?
Yes. Something to think about. I know this is not for now, but this is a strategic plan as you're laying it out, to think about, is there room for us to improve in that area beforehand?
Right, I wonder if, social, emotional, behavioral programs, and one of the things that I have talked to the high school administration, or maybe all administrators, about, just sort of that notion that there are proactive and sort of reactive things that we can do. So we have, when a student becomes dysregulated, you have a program for him and he goes there, but what is it you can do proactively to sort of prevent the dysregulation from the beginning, if that's possible? I mean, we can't obviously say that that's possible for every child, right? Or to build up social emotional competencies. How can we do that kind of instruction in a classroom? Right.
Just out of curiosity, with the disciplinary stuff, is some of that be related to, for example, if there was substance abuse in the high school, that you wouldn't see that in the, presumably, at Marathon or Elmwood, so that students are being disciplined for things that you would hope don't occur at all in the
That
lower
big
grades.
kids do and little kids don't.
Yes.
Yes.
That's helpful for context. Dr. Kavanaugh, did you hear during your tours a need for better partnership with parents? And, for instance, all this SEL work, the disciplinary work, or even the diversity-related work, this is not the work of the schools alone.
Right.
So it's a partnership. So did that emerge out of your listening tour, that there is a need to build that bridge and that connection, that what you're talking in the schools is reiterated somehow? I know the ownership can't be on the schools, but that dialogue needs to occur often. I mean, I know that Mrs. Carver at Elmwood would send those things, talk to your child about these things, and some parents don't appreciate that. They think it's preaching. I personally like that reminder, that, just a reminder, and kind of knowing what's going on in the school, that you're teaching these 3-step thing, and if you repeat that at home, that'll stick with the child, and it's a tool, effective tool for parents who want to use it. So how do we build that connection ultimately? Because this is the bedrock for our kids, their social emotional safety, before they can focus on academics.
Yeah, I think in some ways you just offer, and obviously we don't have the answers because this is not designed to have answers, right? It's just designed to be questions. But I think, when you offer programs for parents, you can put it out there, and hopefully parents would like to engage. So, for example, Mary Ellen Grady and Samantha Harris doing the mindfulness program at the middle school. It's a lovely opportunity, I think, for parents to better understand some of the things that are happening at the middle school with their children every day. And if the kids are decompressing and the parents are decompressing, that's really nice, right? Justin Pominville and I were talking this morning, and he said, he had gone to a professional development workshop where they had generated research saying that if a teacher, even in the teacher's own private life, was practicing mindfulness, it trickled down in the classroom to the kids, and those kids ended up being higher achieving students because they were in a classroom where the teacher engaged in mindfulness.
Right.
I thought that was lovely. Yeah.
So in terms of next steps, because we're going to take this and kind of absorb it and come back to
Absolutely.
it in February.
Yes.
I'm just, so we are not going to look for comment or question at this point, is that you do not want?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm aware of the time too, so.
Yes.
We will come back to this in February. So that brings us up then, do you have anything else in your
Thank you.
report?
I'm well done. This isn't fantastic.
I do not.
And I know how much work. I can only
It's
imagine.
a lot of work.
I don't
It
know.
is,
I
yes.
can only imagine how much work this is.
Oh, thank you.
Can I ask about that? I know we're going to come back to this, but the next steps, the process, the focus groups, the focus of the focus groups. I'm just curious, by the time a focus group occurs, will there already be sort of a new vision or a new strategic? Like, is it sort of how to then accomplish an already determined next vision, or is it to come up with what we want our?
Well, I think there'll be broad topics.
Okay.
So I'll give you a good example. One of the things that we had talked about on Tuesday was the question of communication. And communication so that the end result would be people had a great understanding of the needs in the schools. And typically that wouldn't be part of your strategic plan if things were going along in a way that there had been no great changes in our community. But with the addition of so many students coming into the district, and that resulting in bulging buildings and increased buses and need for staff, and at some point we're going to reach that sort of bursting place, right, where it's not sustainable anymore. And so how much communication do we need to have, and research and information that just continues to go out to the community? And would that be something that we were interested in and thinking about that as a strategic objective, right? So communication might be one of those topics that we put out to the community and say, what do you think?
So I'm just, I'm not sure how this all exactly plays out, so I'll just throw this out there and
Okay.
move along. But just two thoughts. One, I know I agree with you that if a parent or staff member, community member came to you with something, it should be taken seriously. They took the trouble to bring that up. I do also know that lots of people are very happy with a lot of things, and if you don't hear from them, it doesn't mean that change is warranted. So if
Correct.
So in the past, there have been times programmatically along the road of my children's education where a positive voice was not articulated. So a broad problem was interpreted when maybe it didn't exist. So
Right.
I guess I would just be cautious about the lack of, maybe positive voices or the breadth of voices that you might have heard, because there are a lot of happy people
Yes.
who like things and don't necessarily want change. So that the other thing, kind of going back to curriculum and programming. Again, it's a strategic vision sort of a thing. I guess I'm asking if this will come out, because I think parents wonder, going to your leveling question, is the objective of this year for my student to get them to the grade level proficiency as determined by standards? Or is the objective for my student to go from where they are now to one giant step forward, regardless of where the start was? So it's, I guess, strategically or vision-wise, education-wise, setting a parent's expectation about what our district is doing and how our efforts are being expended, I think will help. If parents can be clear as to
Yes.
what the expectation is. Is it that if my child walks into second grade reading at a sixth grade level, then are we going to get them to seventh grade level? Or are we going to help them develop other skills that maybe are less developed? So that's a kind of thing that I think parents don't always understand. what we're trying to do, and it would help if we could articulate that.
Yes, I think that that is important. And, you know, in the same vein, if you have a student who enters second grade and they're reading at, you know, the beginning of first grade level, according to, you know, Fountas and Pinnell BAS data or whatever, or STAR data, is the goal then to get them to the end of second grade by the end of second grade? Because that's really 2 years of growth in a single year for a student who's already struggling. So is that realistic to explain to a parent, or really what were we hoping for instead of the achievement, the growth?
Exactly.
Right?
I totally agree. I think setting expectations with parents, I think, you know, talking also about the stress level going to middle school, I think parents' stress level increases tremendously when their kids go to middle school. They hear it's middle school, it's a new thing, it's a more important thing. The stress in general goes up, and the communication starts to fall off.
Yes.
So it's a weird confluence of factors, but I think the more our strategic plan can articulate expectations and what we're trying to accomplish, I think it will help parents know what to expect.
I agree.
So that's sort of the general comment.
Yes.
And thank you.
So we'll come back to all of this February. I agree with Jen. This is a tremendous body of work that obviously, I don't know how you found the time between the last December focus group and this to put that all together. So
You just didn't
I've
sleep
been doing
for 3
little pieces
weeks.
along the way.
yeah, it is quite a bit. And then also, if we could come back to the strategic plan, to that process,
Yes, absolutely.
to get greater, to understand it better for all of us and kind of figure out how we're going forward. So, did you have other stuff for your report other than?
No. Okay. I bet you're wishing I had less stuff.
In that case, I will move into the school committee chair report, which is that I have approved for payment the payroll warrants S19014. Payroll warrant has been included in your packet. So I will move on. I do not have an update on the office hours because we obviously didn't have them. So that will bring us, we already did that, to we already did the new business, so that brings us to old business, which is the school committee policy BIA, new school committee member orientation. And do we want to, I know that you and Mina have worked on this quite a bit.
I was just going to hand this over to Mina. I'll absolutely take this. So it was a very easy document, I think, to update from the last time that we looked at it. One of the things that we agreed upon was that we should say that each new member should be given access to the following materials, and that is because we very rarely hand out paper to people anymore. So all of the a copy of went away. Number 7, the district strategy document and school improvement plans. That wasn't on the list, and we thought that those were important documents to give to new members. And also the school committee meeting norms that are in existence at the time that you come on board. Even if they are immediately updated after you come on board in the summertime, it's just important to be able to share those norms. Okay. I don't know if you wanted to jump in anywhere because this is really kind of your baby. Okay. Then we talked about a couple of the other things that would be really nice for the chair and the superintendent to do. And one of them would be to help new members by arranging visits to the schools. So if there's a new member who chooses to have some kind of an introductory guided tour, I would be happy to take them through the 5 buildings so that they can kind of get a feel of what it looks like inside and meet the administration. And then the other thing that we thought maybe would be good for a new member to know would be how to fill a liaison role.
One thing I might add to this bulleted list is meeting the administrative assistant. Georgette, in our case, I think it's not, if you haven't served on school committee, you might not know that she's there and that she also supports school committee.
Yeah,
Which
it's a pretty
actually,
critical role.
It was actually news to me that we had someone who supported us administratively. So.
The one thing that I might add in the very first paragraph is where it says 8 hours of orientation training. I wonder if it would be helpful to specify that that's MASC training as opposed to like what we're doing down here. It's separate in addition to.
Yeah.
Because I think that's.
And that's a good point, because I read that once at first, and I was like, wait, did I do that? But then I remembered that it was the MASC. Yeah. It's good to clarify.
Mandated, right? And there's
It
Yeah, you
is,
don't
it
have
is
to- yeah.
mandated, it is required.
And then
So just those two changes, what are we saying? So you talked about meeting the administrative assistant, right?
Mhm.
Now, is that something that you want in the policy? Because we have the checklist, right, attached. Because we have kept
Oh.
this higher level on the
Checklist
policy, so if you look at the checklist, I mean, I do think the MASC, the 8-hour training, that I think we should clarify that that's the MASC training.
That's a good point, Mina. You're keeping this very, like you said, higher order stuff, so I think the specifics should go in the checklist, and then they don't ever have to be voted on if things change. Pretty smart.
In the policy itself, the last sentence is approved school committee budget line items.
Yes.
Is there a budget line item for school committee?
There is,
Yes.
in fact, yes.
Should I know? So I know that our expenses are covered, I just didn't realize that we had a specific budget set aside for that somehow.
It's not a lot. But it is enough so that if you attend a workshop and, you know, you have travel expenses, or you attend the MASC conference on the Cape, you know, you can get reimbursement for that.
Right, and I guess the thought process behind it is this, right? MASC training is the 8-hour orientation is needed. The MASC conference that you had an opportunity to attend, I think what trainings and conferences of that nature give you is an opportunity to connect with so many other districts, to know what's going on, to learn from others' best practices, if you will. So it is only to help us do our job better, right? I was just sharing with Dr. Kavanaugh and Nancy today at the planning meeting that I had an opportunity to speak with the Framingham school committee chair the other day, and he was sharing some of the work that they are doing in their district. For instance, they are looking to get some help with regard to communication, right? And so you kind of get new ideas as you do all of this. So the thought process is, so MSC does do this conference every year, so it makes sense knowing that that's going to come up to plan for it, right? And we were thinking that perhaps it's a $500 to $600 per member expense for that particular conference. So knowing that that expense is coming up, we should earmark that. Now, if a particular member doesn't use it, we will have that pool of money remaining. But we could also use it perhaps for something like a diversity training or anything else that'll help us do our job better. So just earmarking that would help, was the thought. And I think there is a small amount, to Dr. Kavanaugh's point, that's earmarked.
As an example of that, the Youth Commission is looking into doing a diversity training, and the chair had approached me to see if the school committee would be interested in perhaps doing a joint, participating with them. There would be some cost associated with that, but the money is in there also for things like covering our MASC dues and stuff like that.
Yeah,
as
I
well.
think it's an I didn't realize that I thought it was part of another line item. I didn't realize it was called out specifically for school committee. I think my personal experience with the training, I would have been lost without the new member training. Even though it's mandated for a reason, and I think for all the reasons you stated, going down to the conference was very important. So I'm not questioning it, I just didn't realize that we had our own budget line, and I'm glad. I think it's important.
Yeah, I think it's there because your membership in MASC falls under that line item.
So can we vote on this as amended with just that MASC added in at the in front of the orientation?
Right.
Is section?
8 hours of MASC, at least 8 hours of MASC orientation training. Any feedback on the checklist itself?
I think old meeting law is you have to be certain. It's not just familiarizing yourself, right? Don't you have to? Or is that
You have to
ethics
pass
training? It's the ethics training. You have to get certified.
Right, and
The open meeting was part of that, though.
So the reason for that was, if you look at the policy itself, it talks to providing all of that, right? The reason, we use the word familiarize is you may read and sign up, but you may have some doubts, like what constitutes a deliberation? It's not specified in that very clearly. I think, you have this doubt in your mind. So being able to do that and ask those questions. So this ties back to, if you look at the last paragraph, which talks about the chair and the superintendent will respond and clarify the practices around all of these. So as you familiarize yourself with all of this, if you have any questions, use that opportunity to ask them anything related to any of this, right? So as you familiarize yourself with it, right? I guess the whole point we were talking about with orientation is this is simply a beginning, right? There is no way you're going to learn all the intricacies and complexity of this job in a month, for sure. I mean, even over years, you're always learning. But there are some basic ones which you could start off with, which are so key at the get-go, that having that shot in the arm helps. But I'm certain we'll have to revisit all of this over the course of 6 months or so, right?
And this is more of a form, correct? This
Right.
isn't part of the policy. So if someone comes on board and they say, you know what, I would have loved to have known we had a school committee line item in the budget, throw that in there, whatever. You can just add things as they come up.
Exactly.
So I like what you've got here, and if the is this where it says something about meeting the key? It was in the policy, I guess, and it just said it was generalized. That's fine. Okay.
What are you asking about?
The only thing that I picked up on, and this could be specific to me, but my fob does not open the schools. It only opens the central office building.
Yes.
Oh, I think
That's
we're
good to
fine
know.
with that
Yeah, no, I think they all only open the central office, yeah.
Okay, we'll correct that. And, if you have any particular preference for understand practices rather than familiarize, we can change that verbiage. The one thing that I wanted to point to was the agenda item, adding an agenda item and creating a new subcommittee. We talked about possibly adding that to the policy, but we held off, saying that although we have a general practice, we haven't documented it. So we probably want to document it and bring it back. So Nancy and I are hoping that, we can just get together, do a draft and bring it back for your review as to when a new member comes in, you're all gung-ho about having, some things that you want to see happen or what have you. But then there is already a set pattern, there is a strategic plan in place. It's not something you can expect to just jump on right away or have a subcommittee right away. So how do we set the expectations? And also on the agenda front, where are the boundaries? I think that's something Dr. Kavanaugh brought up, that some of these things may not be in the purview of the school committee. So being able to have an honest conversation and say, this is really in my domain, and not necessarily something you put out there just like that. So just some thoughts on how we can go about that.
So would that be where, I know we've had conversations about this in the past, I know there's like a rhythm to the meetings that we have. There are certain times that we have certain topics that come up every year. As a new school committee member, I don't feel that rhythm. I don't know it. This is my first time.
Right.
And I had asked for a schedule of what our rhythm is, and I hadn't seen it yet, but I know we're working on that. But could we have that on this checklist?
I really hope so. My hope is that we can look at the calendar. The way I understand it is that there is a set calendar that's being followed from the last year.
Correct.
Right. So whatever was on the agenda last year, you definitely want to go over and see, but then you may have some additions, right? So hopefully we'll have that. And sometimes I think with the budget, I have seen the timelines change, right? So that can certainly affect change in the calendar, but we can have a typical, month one, month two, right, exactly. Exactly.
It's more like what to expect
General.
in January, what
Yes.
to expect in March, that
Yes.
kind of thing. Like, for example, when do the school improvement plans come to us?
Sure.
I know it's spring sometime, I think it's late spring, but things like that, just to kind of have it made available early on, so as a new school committee member, you're not looking for something in the wrong season. You know what's coming
Absolutely.
down later.
Absolutely. So, this is just a start, really. I think we'll continue to build on this orientation, right? But just having a checklist as a starting point and these two items, hopefully they help.
That's great, yeah.
And then, as new members come in, I'm sure they'll have ideas. And I think it may be something else to think about is get feedback from new members after 3 or 4 months of them being on board. What would you want changed in the orientation? Do you want something added? What was great? Something like that.
Thank you for
Yeah, this is a great work, Mina.
the work that you've done over.
Thank you. And to Dr. Kavanaugh, too. We had a very good conversation.
We did. All right. Well, then, at this point, I would seek a motion, unless there's any further discussion on it, a motion to approve policy BIA Hopkinton School Committee, new school committee member orientation as amended.
So moved.
Motion by Jen, second by Amanda. All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. And that is so moved. Yes, good job, thank you.
Good work.
Then that brings us up for our second opportunity for public comment. I do not see members of the public, so in that case, we will move on to items by consensus. It's me.
As superintendent, I recommend that the school committee vote to approve the items by consensus as outlined in your agenda.
So moved.
Mina, second?
Second.
Motion by Mina, second by Jen. All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. And it is so moved. And I then would look for a motion to adjourn our meeting.
So moved.
Motion by Mina and a second.
Second.
Second by Amanda. All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes. So then we are adjourned at 9 p.m. and our next meeting is right here next Thursday at 7 p.m. here in the high school library. And then we have another one following that in February. So thank you all and have a good night.
Thank you.